Dave Weigel, Washington correspondent for the political correspondent for the Washington Post. Dave, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm doing well. So I see you're outside. That's good.
I am. I'm in Los Angeles, which is not DC, which is awesome. I would recommend it to anybody who lives in DC to get here for a while. Yeah,
I can imagine. Yes, it would be nice. I'm waiting for the sun to come here. All right. Well, so Dave, you're out there. Obviously, you're writing the trailer. There is no campaigns right now.
Yeah.
Or at least no political campaigns, more or less. And you're covering some of the stuff that some of the pieces you've written have to do with what the stimulus means for the next campaign. I want to talk about that in a moment. But you focused in on the Democrats sort of like actively engaging, or at least more so than we've seen in the past. And that's sort of the point. With this union drive in Alabama, where you have workers in Bessemer, Alabama, trying to unionize their Amazon warehouse. So what's the story? Why are they engaged in this? And at some level, there was a story in the Times today. I don't know if you saw it yet. I know it's early out there. That the way that the lessons that were learned from the stimulus in 2009 have been deployed today by Democrats. And there was a little bit of, I guess, the Obama people were a little bit upset that they were in some way sort of criticized for the way they responded. But talk about this in the context of the union.
Yeah, it's not brand new for Democrats to be this invested in labor drive, but it's newer than people think it is. So when Joe Biden taking the lead of Bernie Sanders and this groups that have been organizing around this union drive, Joe Biden listened to them, recorded this video saying, without saying the word Amazon, it's up to you whether to form a union or not. Don't be intimidated. That was kind of a high sign for a lot of Democrats to invest more in this. So you've got Alabama Democrats putting time and resources into advertising the drive. You had a delegation of House Democrats go down. You just basically have this confidence. It was some of this was happening at the same time the PRO Act passed the House. This confidence with Democrats in just being actively organizing pro-labor party in a way that they kind of got away from in the 90s, right? I mean, so much of Democratic trauma is based on losing 1980 and undoing everything the party stood for over a couple decades. And so much what we see in the last couple months, to a surprising extent, if you didn't vote for Biden, if you thought that Sanders or Warren was the only candidate who would do this, to a surprising extent, Joe Biden, age 78, rethinking all these concessions Democrats made to get away from welfare payments, to get away from unions. Like, this was just the biggest example. Talking to people in Alabama, like, no one could remember a president being this adamant in favor of a particular union drive. I think they had to go back to the 40s really to find one.
Yeah, I spoke to one of the organizers of that of the union there, and he cited Biden support as being very helpful as to what they're doing. Well, let's walk through. I mean, because let's just start with the Sanders campaign, because the Sanders campaign, I don't know if people remember this, was not just campaigning. I mean, they were actively engaging in union drives around the country over the course of the campaign. I mean, they had sort of integrated it, and sometimes they were deploying their email lists, right? Just remind people of that.
Well, that's really important. So Faz Shakir, who was the campaign manager of the Sanders campaign in 2020, he joined then. He would talk to me about this, that every time you send a campaign email out that's not raising money for you, you're using that list to you're burning out maybe somebody who gets it to give attention to something else. And they use the list multiple times, I think dozens of times, to promote some sort of union drive or a strike. It was pretty frequently there was a strike happening. We support the striking workers. And look, that the effect of that in the primary was to kind of goad people like Biden into doing more. I mean, sometimes Biden would hog the credit, right? There was this shop and save strike in Massachusetts. Warren and Sanders were pretty out early in favor of it, and then Biden showed up, and then on the trail, Biden would start talking about how I showed up at this picket line. but the lesson was taught and learned that this was what Democrats wanted to hear from the people ready to lead them. And I mentioned Faz because this group, More Perfect Union, was founded like not a lot of fanfare after the 2020 election, and that's one of the organizations that just with not a ton of resources went in and one, use his connection to Ron Klain to say you should pay attention to this Amazon Drive. He already was paying attention, but kind of talking through what impact Biden would have. And two, just talking to workers, putting out videos, creating content that because the problem for a lot of union drives, speaking generally, is it's not just that people might want to form one; it's that they are told from their employers, even if they're not getting fired, it's going to be a lot of money being, you're going to take out of your own paycheck to give to this group. It's a lot of effort. It might fail. Why even bother? So trying to create a sense of solidarity momentum has been a goal of Sanders campaign veterans. And that's kind of through osmosis gotten to Biden and to the rest of the Democrats.
Well, when you contrast it too with how, and hi Dave, good to see you.
Hey, good to see you.
When you contrast it to obviously the Obama administration, the last Democratic administration, you cite the efforts or really lack thereof, I would say, during Obama's tenure, even when he had a supermajority, the Free Choice Act, right, or the Employee Free Choice Act. The Democrats didn't even fight for that in the slightest. Can you contrast that with what we're seeing right now from Biden's leadership? And even though Obama had, I'm going to put my walking shoes on rhetoric during his campaign, similar to how Biden talked big about union support during the campaign.
I mean, that was the surprise. Like, so you just mentioned it. Obama had this line. I remember the one when I went back and looked for the exact quote. The one I saw was in South Carolina, which he won huge, and said, if you guys are on the picket line, I'm going to get some walking shoes and walk there with you. And people said,
soft
okay,
walking shoes. Soft walking
shoes. We're gonna take it literally. And he never did. So the same promise from Biden did rang pretty hollow until, he has not walked a picket line, but this is exactly the sort of thing that labor wanted Obama to do. And Emily, you talked to Democrats in these primaries post-Obama, 2016 and 2020, that was a real problem for labor. One, they had members who drifted away from the Democratic Party because they said, okay, what do these guys actually do for us? It was different in states where the Republican Party was all in a right to work. But generally, the guy made promises. Where are they? Unionization is still declining. And also just I think the political mood still, even though Obama was a fairly young president, came out of 80s and 90s politics and not the 70s, there still was this shell shock of you're going to alienate people you need if you're just all in for labor. The Chamber of Commerce is going to come and smash you. So what happened instead was the Chamber of Commerce just kind of rolled them. EFCA it never had 60 votes as is, but one mistake Democrats made in 2009 and 10, people have been writing about how they have looked back and regret it. The big one probably is they just didn't utilize reconciliation the way they could have. They could have passed another reconciliation bill after Obamacare. Could they have put EFCA in it? No, they could have put some other forms. But you're right. They had this bill. Most Democrats were for it. It had passed the House when Bush was president. And when they needed just to convince Arlen Specter, convinced in this couple month window where they had 60 votes, that was not a priority. They did not schedule a vote. They did not push it. I don't think that would happen today. I think if there was a window where it was clear Democrats had the votes and it wasn't clear how long they'd had. Look at it now. Look at the pressure you have on name a Seventh Circuit judicial nominee. Right. That was not a thing that people organized around. No offense to the people who did shout about it. There were a couple, but it was not. If you went just consumed your normal amount of news or you watched MSNBC, you just kind of said, let's give the ball to Obama. I'm sure he's doing the right thing. You didn't say, look, you told people that you were going to pass this bill. Where is it? So you're right. The Biden administration put out a statement saying they support the PRO Act, which is a bit more than was done with EFCA. And then you have in the Senate, it's not clear what the steps will be, because you can dodge a lot of this by saying, well, we don't want to break the filibuster. But the fact that they're trying is very new.
And I want to just remind people that not only did Obama say that, but in 2011, when Scott Walker assaulted unions in Wisconsin, this was a ready-made opportunity for Barack Obama, and he said nothing. It was as if it didn't exist, and it was a massive story. And this theme, though, of there's two halves of it, right? There's the Biden half of it, and then there's this sort of like the era and all that means in terms of not giving Biden the benefit of the doubt, or not giving him an extended honeymoon, however you want to phrase that. The fact that you do have people who are going like, hey, Breyer's got to resign. Well, you got to pick judges for the Seventh Circuit. We are monitoring who Merrick Garland is picking to fill out the, the antitrust division. There's just so much more scrutiny, informed scrutiny, and what I mean, there these factors. I guess we could spend hours trying to figure out like what developed. But part of it is, I think it seems there is so much leveraging the mistakes of 2009 from all sides. It feels like all players within that world, whether it's from the outside or the inside, they all are using it to leverage what they should do this time around.
Absolutely. I think Benji Sarlin from NBC likes to compare this to the movie. I forgot the title. They retitled it "Live, Die, Repeat." Edge of Tomorrow, I think it's called. Where basically, Tom Cruise keeps reliving the same battles, and then because he's relived it, knows what to do the next time. This is only their second time getting to try it, but Ron Klain was there in the White House during the stimulus as a Biden advisor. He's now the chief of staff. It's rarely do you get. I can't even think of another time when you've had people who were watching from the second row and thinking about how the first row was getting it all wrong, got to be in the first row and make all the decisions. So that's been a gigantic factor this whole time. And the whole aspect of Obama and his legacy here is interesting because Biden was a defender of Obama's legacy during the campaign, almost protesting too much about it, right? Any kind of criticism would be made of something that was left unfinished by Obama. Or most frequently you'd hear this with the deportations, and he would just rise up to defend Obama and criticize people for talking trash on Obama. This was, I think, very effective in keeping black voters who ended up deciding the nomination behind him. So Biden's like the only guy who can do this. And there's a good New York Times story today by Stead Herndon about some of the Democratic thinking about this. I wasn't going to say debates, because most Democrats are fine with saying, yes, there's more we can do than we did in 2009. You've got a couple people like your Valerie Jarrett's and Rahm Emanuel's who resent this, but they don't run the party anymore. I mean, Rahm Emanuel's out of the cabinet. He's commenting on ABC News. There's this slow realization that the people that the left blamed for stemming the Obama administration when it could have done more, not like asking for something impossible, but doing a thing that could have passed or could have gotten budget reconciliation. They just don't have the ear of this White House. So I feel like no one wants to be naive and say they fixed it, because that leads to disaster. But this level of pressure moving a White House is kind of new. I mean, go back to how Bill Clinton operated in the first few months, or how Jimmy Carter did. And the story of like Democrats taking power like Biden did is they have some ideas, they immediately scale them back, and they get rolled. Now, so the minimum wage has been scaled back. Obviously, that's one thing he wanted to do immediately. He hasn't done. The immigration bill does not. The comprehensive bill is not moving as fast as they promised. But look, Obama did not. This is one of the things you heard again and again from Latino organizers, that Obama said he'd have an immigration bill in his first 100 days. He totally could have. Something could have passed in 2009. He didn't even introduce it, whereas Biden has introduced it. So that's like a common theme of this presidency is we're going to try the stuff that the quote unquote professional left was telling us to do. And when they've bailed on it, it's been, well, we don't have enough votes to break the filibuster on this one. I mean, minimum wage is kind of the example, or if you thought we had 50 votes if we broke the filibuster, we actually don't right now. Is that convenient for them to dodge that fight? I mean, definitely. But I think it stands out that the other things they said they were going to do and try, they actually did them, which is new. Every other Democratic president gets in and immediately scales it back. I mean, Bill Clinton couldn't get a $16 billion stimulus bill passed with 56, I think it was either 55 or 56 Senate Democrats, and they just whiffed it. And Biden has not.
I think, I think they're gonna. I mean, I think that we're gonna. The conversation is not over about the filibuster by a long shot
Yeah.
at this point too. And I want to talk about the way that they are using the stimulus, because I think that is also another example of this, where they're actually going out and politicking on something that they did that is good. But before we get there, I'm very curious about this. So Faz, you write that Faz approached Klain.
Yes.
And the and there was you say Applebaum, congressman from Alabama, also flagged the drive for the White House. Like, what do you have a sense of, like, how does that work? I mean, like,
Yeah.
is this the thing that, like, the Biden administration's like only vaguely aware of this and they don't understand the import, or is it they don't want to engage in it and then they have to be convinced to engage in it? Like, what is that dynamic?
Well, I mean, so a good way to think about this is the Trump administration versus the Bush administration, right? So George Bush gets in there. He has a collection of conservative appointees. A lot of them are Texans who he knows. But if you're just like a David Bossie, or you're a conservative activist, you don't have a direct line. I mean, you can get something in front of them, but not until Trump do you realize, oh man, all I need to do is go on Fox News and say, let's pardon this guy who shot up a village in Iraq, and the president is watching and he'll listen. You had a direct line. People had lines to your Crew Lewandowskis and the people in the orbit who were not the kind of people who took power when Republicans won before, and they were this time. And so without a lot of activism, I mean, like there weren't marches in favor of building the wall. It was just that people they could kind of push an open door, and they had finally a Republican listening to them. I think a version way less giving than what I just described is happening with the Biden folks. It's just that the people who know the Biden team are able to get them ideas in front of them where they weren't. Compare getting something in front of Ron Klain to getting something in front of Rahm Emanuel. I mean, famously, he just was really arrogant, really dismissive of the left, thought most of what the left was asking for was a waste of time, even judicial nominations. He was annoyed that people would keep bringing that up to him. And that's not how these people operate. I'm not trying to venerate Eddie. I'm just saying it's different now, that there are people in this administration who have relationships on the left. Even the comms team, includes people from Move On. It's just a more connected to, I'd say, the left generally. And then some of that's kind of the more soccer mom liberal left. Much less of it is the Sanders left. But it's true that Biden gets along really well with Sanders, and he has people in his team who get along with Sanders' team, and that was not the case under Barack Obama. So a lot of this is personal relationships, and some of it is the constant activism. I mean, having a big primary where Biden didn't bend on a lot of stuff, but having this in his face again and again, I think really did have an impact on them saying, okay, here's what you have to do in order to keep people in the tent. I don't know, man. I haven't got the sense that people are having street parties over everything Biden does. But I was in Louisiana last week for a story. There is a special election coming up for Cedric Richmond's seat on Saturday, and the early voting was last week. And it was just weird. It had been so long since I talked to a bunch of Democratic voters, because it's without getting too much into it. There's a guy in the race who's endorsed by Richmond, is running on his connections to the White House, and there's people in the race who are running as outsiders. And the voters I talked to were like, yeah, Biden's doing pretty great. Like, I'm really happy with the way the country's going. I really think this administration is doing good things. We send somebody there who works with them. Awesome. They're just, there wasn't the same frustration that I saw like immediately under Barack Obama that wasn't really ever getting to the Obama White House.
Well, I mean, so Gary Chambers is running in that race, right?
Yes. He's one of the people. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'd just be curious about your thoughts on that, but I know we don't really have the full amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious too about how the kind of Democratic, not resurgence, but renewed focus on the South is playing into this. I mean, you said you were down in Louisiana. We saw the wins in Georgia. We saw the Democrats delivered when they promised material things to voters, and it worked out. And I mean, the checks are $1,400, but I digress. I mean, and then of course, what we've been seeing, just I guess in Alabama as well too, right? Which is the deepest red state you can think of. But there seems to be an understanding by Democrats that we can't just really ignore these states going forward, and a lot of that is connected, I think, to Black voters as well. Can you touch on how that's informed this union pro-union stance from the Biden administration?
Yeah, well, and one thing we haven't mentioned yet is the American Recovery Plan Act. I mean, I still wish I had a better acronym, but it includes this. I'll just use neutrally the word bailout. It includes like just all this free money for union pension plans. That was the kind of thing that unions just never got to the table on. Certainly not under Trump. He did one bill for coal miners, right? And he took all the credit because that's what he did. But yeah, they've oriented themselves much towards these like movements in the party, and the fact that states like Arizona and Georgia came on the board. A lot of that had to do with the deep organizing. These are not heavily organized states, but you have in those states building trades and retail workers and health workers, and they were super organized and they got taken seriously. I mean, the story that the Stacey Abrams, I guess, is the avatar of all this because it's the easiest story to tell and it's the most impressive turnaround. But it was about finding all these people and convincing them, no, actually, they'll be like a deliverable if you elect us and you send us into power. So that is new, and I don't know how to scan across like the whole Midwest because there's a lot of stuff they did or they ran on that they think will benefit the working class white guy who just bailed on the party for other reasons. I mean, that the Republicans, it's very telling that the two issues that kind of honed in on are the Keystone Pipeline and immigration. Both of those are kind of not the reasons if you live in Ohio that like your plant moved. I mean, if you work in an auto plant, you don't care about the Keystone Pipeline. If they move the plant to Canada, it's not because immigrants are here. But so it's clear that Democrats have just more of a story to tell based on, and again, I sound like I don't want to simp for them, but it's just right. Very different from the old attitude they had, which is that we're going to run on stuff and we're going to ignore the organizers and activists because they're always whining and they don't know better. Like getting rinsed in the Midwest once and losing voters they never thought they were going to lose made them more attentive to labor. I mean, that's one thing I remember in the campaign is there would be these labor forums and people really had to show their work. They had to prove that they were actually going to support labor because these guys had watched their members drift toward Trump and they couldn't name anything Democrats had done for them recently. Like the fact that there's no discussion of a new trade deal right now for a Democratic president, that's fairly new. Again, that's Clinton and Obama were big into using trade as like a foreign policy, wide-ranging just a thing that was less about labor than about like global economics. That's gone. So I don't know if it could come back. It's just surprising to watch them govern this way.
There just seems to be a lack of outright hostility towards major segments of the party. I mean, this is on some level, what we're sort of like applauding is like basic coalition politics, without but so let me ask you this: if the likes of Rahm Emanuel are not, and it's not just Rahm Emanuel, right? I mean, there are a legion of mini Rahm Emanuels who work in that sort of universe. Like, who characterize to me, like, who are staffing these things? Like when you show up, I mean, there's thousands of people who work in the administration, right? We end up hearing about the cabinet secretaries and then maybe a layer or two underneath that. And to a certain extent, it feels like it's sort of split between sort of, mainline Democrats, if you will, or establishment Democrats, not necessarily ones that are hostile necessarily to the left, but some who are certainly sort of are dipped in that they come from different waters. But then there seems to be others. How would you characterize those people? Like whose universe are they from?
Wait, I kind of know what you're talking about, but which?
Well, you say like, the Rahm Emanuels don't have claims here, but so whose universe do the people who do?
It's good. They're just, some of it's just that they're younger. So I mean, there's people in this team like Emmy Ruiz is running politics at the White House, and she was a Hillary campaign veteran, and so on paper, people might look at her and say, "Oh, well, Hillary campaign, I know what that's about. That's about never only doing incremental things." not wanting to do politics. But it's kind of this cohort of Democrats who came up in the Obama era and watched them lose everything and get so disappointed, are just more aggressive about spending money, making people know that what they benefited from, and then advertising it. So there weren't that many ROMs. I mean, but the thing that I have not unraveled is that Bruce Reed, who was there in the 90s under Bill Clinton, who was there for Obama, one of the original neoliberals, is still in the Biden administration, and people were kind of waiting for what's the sellout he's going to pull that's going to pivot back to austerity. There just hasn't been one right now. Even what they're talking about this summer, if they do an infrastructure plan, they're talking about raising taxes as part of it, knowing that they're going to raise taxes on the wealthy and that Republicans will be against it, not the Clinton style. And Bruce Reed was there for this. The deficit's a problem, so we're just going to, everyone has to suffer. We're going to cut benefits and we're going to raise taxes. Just no one talks like that anymore. And I'd look, I mean, if there were Democrats who still believe this, I would talk to them. But even Manchin isn't on that path. I mean, if Manchin was a 90s style austerity Democrat, he just would have bailed on this bill, right? He wouldn't have voted for it. So I think it's just a collective traumatization of this entire class of Democrats. And some of them were more moderate and worked for Clinton or, worked for John Hickenlooper. I mean, like John Hickenlooper's campaign spokesman works for AOC now, and her beliefs has not changed. Like the strategy is different. So I think it's just been kind of a move left in the party. And that's one of the things when Republicans will say, like, this party move left, I'll say, well, like, that's inarguable. It totally has. Republicans have moved right, Democrats have moved left. The Republican critique is just weird because instead of attacking the things that all the left energy is based on, they're attacking left-wing stuff that's not happening. So they're going to abolish the suburbs. They're going to get rid of Dr. Seuss. They're not really attacking the main change here, which is that liberals rediscovered LBJ style, not the bad LBJ, but the original popular LBJ style of Keynesianism and uplifting people by giving them money. And they're all on the board now. It's weird.
Isn't that a confirmation of what the left has been saying all this whole time? Is they can't, if you actually implement the policies that 5 or 10 years ago they said that you were implementing, they can't really attack those because people like it. I mean, we've watched, I don't know, a million Fox news segments where they're like, well, of course. I mean, if you give people money, they're going to be happy. And it's like, well, okay, maybe we should be giving people money and make people happy. I mean, it doesn't have the staying power. I mean, that's why, that's why McCarthy's at the border right now saying this is a crisis. And everybody's going well, not the kind of crisis you think it is.
But that's kind of a good Republican tactic generally that's worked before is this president took over and something else is happening that he ruined, and it's tough because so many people's attention is fixated on the pandemic, not on the border. It really isn't. I mean, the reason they're going to the border, it's kind of like the Onion headline, Marilyn Manson going door to door to shock people. They're really angry that the media is not rushing to the border. And people are covering it, press is covering it, but they're trying to make that the thing Americans care about and talk about. And it's proven to be kind of tough without Trump as president driving all the attention that way. But you're right. I mean, both sides have done this, though. If you talk to Republicans, I did this around CPAC. I was talking, Matt Schlapp, who runs ACU at CPAC, has been around forever. And I was asking him, what's some stuff that you thought was I didn't say too far right, but what's some stuff that Trump ran on you thought was too unpopular? And he's like, oh, immigration. I thought we needed a different strategy and we couldn't run on a border wall, and he was right. So we do that now. And I feel like the same thing has happened on the left, where even if they're not gushing and admitting it, some of them are. I mean, some of these Democrats are saying, like Ron Klain, that the left was right about this. They were shouting for us to do more stuff, and we should have done more stuff, and now we can. I think it just happened in a big way with a lot of people at once, which kind of, I wouldn't say it surprised me, but I think there was definitely some takes. I remember David Sirota had a take last year about how Biden wanted to get elected and do austerity, and people were dragging him. And I disagree with Sirota sometimes. I was like, no, his take was based on what Biden and his advisors had said. It's had there been no pressure on them whatsoever, who knows what they'd be for. But they just kept staffing up and hiring people who felt otherwise. And, there were these erratic stories where does Biden want like a new deal, or is he going to tack it in? It was unclear where he stood, but people just convinced him that you needed to spend big, and he listened. I mean, it is just Biden being the central figure on this is really weird. If you know his history, you know how much he talked about like deficit reduction and spending cuts and all of that for most of his career. It is very strange that he's doing this, but he is. So that's the question we're figuring out now, like why?
I contend the guy has always been a cipher, and so it's really look at which way the wind is blowing, and then you'll know which way his sail is going to unfurl.
I think that's totally fair, and that's what I thought Trump would do more of that, because he had just gotten into politics with just heterodox, I'd say, beliefs. That's to be generous. For example, like he seemed to be pro-gay marriage and stuff, and said I'm pro-LGBT, and then because his base demanded it, he's like, all right, I'll sign off on all these anti-trans orders, I guess, and like appoint a bunch of anti-LGBT judges. But I thought he would do more shifting towards what was popular. And what he did instead was shifting towards what his base wanted, which is not always the same thing. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. The thing with Democrats is what their base wants is really, in many cases, economically super popular. Is like, decriminalizing border crossings popular. That's not. Is the Hyde Amendment, getting rid of that, and the government quote unquote funding abortions. That's not popular. But on the economics, like the left has been screaming, like everyone wants this stuff. Like look at the minimum wage ballot measure. Like, does it ever lose? No, it doesn't. Like, why are we not doing this already?
Let's I want to ask you, and and maybe we'll have to do this next time because we're out of time, about where we're headed on the $15 minimum wage. Chris Coons was out there the other day saying like there were two provisions I didn't like in Bernie Sanders' bill, but I'm still interested in the $15 minimum wage. Do you know anything about that? Is he just like what is he talking about?
I don't really know what he's referring to, because the minimum wage bill like phases in over time. And I don't think it's not $15 until 2025. And I'm from Delaware. Like, that's not a state that would be crippled by a $15 minimum wage by any means. I don't know what he's talking about. That did sound like blowing smoke. I wouldn't write off this discussion they're having now, where Democrats want Republicans to get on board for a like $11, $12 thing. But this is where I think the left's pressure on the filibuster is important. If McConnell believes there's a serious chance of Democrats changing rules and passing something, he just starts screaming like, if you do this, we're going to blow the Senate up. We're going to pass concealed carry. We're going to do all this. So if the left just said, I guess we're done with this. This is why sometimes on Twitter I'll get frustrated people who say they didn't do $15 minimum wage in February, so they never intend to do it. And I was like, well, you should never compliment Democrats for failing. But like, if you leave the field, there's no pressure on anything happening. If you just say like, I guess they never intend to do this, then Republicans will say, phew, I mean, they left. Like, there's lots of things in the Obama era that they could stop caring about because people stopped agitating because they gave up. And so I think there actually is in Chris Coons's gut, like the idea of a $12 minimum wage is not offensive to him. I don't think I've not interviewed him about exactly. I talked to him when he was running, because he had a DSA primary challenger last year. He was for raising it. He didn't say how much. So I would see if that actually works. But I feel like the role of people continuing to demand $15, and that's basically the entire labor movement, that's part of this, right? Like, this is all social welfare, from like, Otto von Bismarck to today is, there are people agitating for something that's a 10. What if I give them a 6? That's just generally how this works.
Right. I find it hard to believe that there is really, at the beginning of the administration, beyond like the COVID relief bill, that there was a settled plan for any of this. And I think they're responding to, like I say, I think Joe Biden's a cipher. And I think the idea is that, like, they're going to, if they get good feedback on certain things that they do, they're going to follow that course much more than some type of ideological, Joe Biden agenda. I mean, he may shut the doors to certain things, but I think we will get a sense. But certainly it's going to be a function of how much people push. Dave Weigel, always a pleasure. Folks, check out the trailer. Just Google Dave Weigel, the trailer. We'll also put a link at majority.fm. As always, a pleasure, Dave.
Thanks. Good to talk to you guys.